What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger, episode 21. And this episode was pretty good. Not as good as the previous episode, but still pretty good. The episode is called Foe or Friend, Bored or Not. And the episode overall was decent, as I said before. What it did was it started off with us actually seeing a continuation of the previous scene where Noel ends up in the juror cafe bistro area that the Lupinrangers work at. They're confronted by Noel, and what happens is that he ends up having a conversation with them about their current situation. We also see Good Striker with them, which is interesting because, again, we know that there is a history there between Good Striker and Noel, so that's important. But what also happens, which is kind of interesting, is that this is the first time that we end up seeing, shortly after this, Noel interacting with Kagori, and same goes for Good Striker. Good Striker, typically, whenever he sees Kagori, he runs away, he retreats, because there's something going on there, history again, but in this case, Good Striker doesn't hide, and that's a big difference. Clearly there's a change here because Noel ends up preventing him from going off, but still, that's an important difference. What we do end up seeing is that they're discussing different things. Eventually, Noel decides to present them with a present because the letter that he wrote promised that the next time they meet, they would be receiving a present, and these presents are the 2 Lupin collection items that they took off of their last foe that they fought in the previous episode. So that's important. So they managed to get both Lupin collection items, which was good, and it shows something promising and beneficial. At the same time, they are still not convinced that Noel is all good. You know, he's helping, but is he really a good character, or is he evil? And by good or evil, I mean, is he on their side, or is he on the side of the Patourangers? He doesn't know. They don't really know whether or not he is on one side or the other. And again, Patourangers aren't evil, but you know what I mean. Is he on their side? That's really the main point here. And it's unclear. But at the same time, what is explained to them, which we knew the Patourangers knew, but the Lupinrangers hadn't learned yet, is the idea that the items were made by him, or they're modified by him, from the Lupin collection items. And the thing is that he also explains why certain items ended up where they did. So for example, think about the 2 brothers that had the crane and the drill. Those 2, we end up learning that it was a mistake, that it wasn't supposed to land there. Same goes for why there was the Cyclone and also the biker, like the Cyclone dial fighter and the the biker trigger machine ended up with the Power Rangers instead of them each getting 1, rather than them having to split it up. You know what I mean? It's because of certain issues when it came to transporting things that happened due to him. So again, a lot of these things happen because of him, but it is important to consider that about how that actually happened. And they're not particularly happy with the fact that his results are the way they've been, but still they're gonna deal. What we do end up seeing is that in the meantime there is discussion with Gochi, Destra, and Degranio about Lupin X / Patoranger X, and they end up just calling him X because it's simpler, which works. The thing is that they end up discussing things and how they're going to handle this problem. They decide that they're not going to do much because Degranio the things that might be interesting just to see how he contributes to the overall situation, which is very fitting for his kind of character. What we do end up seeing eventually, though, is that there's discussion of Destra's new apprentice kind of character, which is Gabbit. Gabbit is like this hippo monster, and the thing is that he ends up using his brush to kind of soak a certain part of like a river or like a dam, I think it is, so that water would flow in continuous amounts. And the thing is that he's like doing that, he's brushing, And then in the meantime, what happens is that eventually we end up seeing that Noel decides to go back to the Power Rangers. And the thing is that with the Power Rangers, he decides to, talk to them. He's dressed in his Power Ranger uniform, not his Lupinranger one, which is one that we've seen in the past. So he's wearing his gold outfit. And the thing is that he ends up discussing things. They're not really sure if they should trust him, of course, which has been an issue in the past. And eventually, what happens is that they're not sure if they should even work with him. And the other thing is that, speaking to him about the fact that, where are the 2 Lupin collection items they took, and they're deciphering the fact that clearly he's working with the Lupinrangers and he's very suspicious of his allegiance towards them versus the Lupinrangers. So the thing is that Kachiro especially is feeling this way, and what happens is that eventually they end up finding out that there's another Gangler attack, which is from Gavit, and at that point Noel ends up contacting the Lupinrangers about what the Power Rangers discovered to kind of give them a tip and make them, better off. Now, there's also an additional bit of information that is discussed here, and we don't know that till the very end of the episode, so I'm not going to explain it here. But what ends up happening from here is that he informs them about this new Gangler attack, and the thing is that it basically says, are you on board or are you not on board? Implying, are you going to take this tip or are you going to avoid this tip? Do you think that I'm a good guy, basically, or I'm a bad guy? There's more to the story there, but anyway, they end up taking the tip. They end up seeing that the Power Rangers end up fighting this monster Gavit, and the Lupinrangers see that the tip was correct. They end up getting involved in the fight and fighting with the Gangler, as well as the Portermen that are there. And what happens is that the 2 teams fight against the Portermen and the Gangler. Eventually, the Gangler uses his Lupin collection item, which allows him to increase his defenses to the point that he's his defensive abilities are the strength of steel. So he's extremely durable and not something that could just be taken out easily. His abilities are weak, but his Lupin collection item makes him a longer lasting target than he would be otherwise. Basically, he's a really weak opponent with a very useful Lupin collection and ability. But anyway, he ends up talking and just staying in place, and so eventually Kairi just grabs the Lupin collection item away from him, and he has it, which is good. They managed to, following this, have it where Kairi ends up using Good Striker to form Patoranger Ugo, and what happens is that they end up destroying Gavit, and then what happens is that they manage to knock the safe into a water body nearby, and what happens is that we end up seeing that Gochi arrives after the 2 teams part, because initially the Lupin Rangers retreat and then the Power Rangers separate from their Ugo form, and they realize that they have to go after the Lupin Rangers. But then from here we end up seeing Gochi, and Gochi ends up looking for the safe, which they're wondering where it landed, and she actually switches her Lupin collection item that she typically uses for binocular Lupin collection item, I believe it was, which allows her to spot things. So she uses that for investigation purposes, and that allows her to determine where the Lupin collection item is. Well, not the Lupin collection item, but the safe is, and so she realizes that she's going to have to go in the water. Well, from here, what we do end up seeing is a pretty insane scene, which fortunately the end makes it make more sense, but still, it is kind of crazy, is that eventually they're confronted by Noel. Noel is wearing his Power Ranger outfit again, and what happens is that he talks to them, and he eventually decides, I'm not just a simple character like you. I'm not just a simple person like you think. I'm not just completely working for you. And he decides to transform initially into Lupin X and beats them back, basically saying that he is a thief of thieves. So he's looking to get the Lupin collection item. And then what happens is that he eventually decides to switch to Patoranger X, and he really beats back the Lupin Rangers stealing the Lupin collection item and taking it away from them. And it's clear to it definitely makes them feel like, because the Power Rangers are watching this, that maybe he's really on our side because he's fighting the Lupin Rangers and he was able to easily deal with them. Yet at the same time, he's still not convinced, Kishiro especially, because of the fact that there's been a lot of back and forth where it seemed like he's on their side and he's not on their side. And at the same time, it's like, which do you believe? And also how easily he was able to defeat them. That's obviously another issue because he's been trying to get to them forever. But the other concern that they've mentioned is the fact that he knows their identities, which is something that they're suspecting, but it's not fact to them, though it is true. Noel does know the Lupin Rangers' identities. But eventually what does end up happening is that Gambit does grow big because Gochi, and then from here, the Sequoia and Tsukasa end up getting the X trains, the Thunder and the Fire X train, and they end up using it to fight Gambit. And they initially do like the land version of it, but then they swap to Pat Kaiser trains, which is the form that involves those two extra trains. So basically it's the other version of what we saw in the previous episode with Lupin Kaiser trains. So that does happen, and it makes sense because whenever when there's a new form, whenever when they can show both ends of it, they do it. So what does end up happening from here is that following this, they end up using that form and using the Thunder ability of it to defeat the Gangler. And as the Gangler is destroyed, they're happy to know that happened. Back at the Power Ranger base, they end up having it where Kichiro decides to shake hands with Noel and show that he's willing to trust him, but at the same time we end up having it where Tsukasa is not completely convinced, but Sequoia is willing to accept whatever. Same goes for Hilltop. And so that's what's happening there. Kichiro still is a little bit uncertain, and he's a little bit upset because it's very clear, because he ends up getting really angry at one point, but still is willing to kind of trust him. Following this, what we do end up seeing is that at the Lupin Rangers base, they end up discussing the information that was given to them back when they were having their conversation with Noel about the fact that basically the Power Rangers are after them, and in order to help the Lupin Rangers out so that they're not on his case to find out more information about the Lupin Rangers, the whole reason why he ended up fighting them and beating them was mainly for the purposes of leading them astray and making them believe that he was on their side, when in reality, even though he has the Lupin X form, it makes him seem as if he's actually more of an enemy rather than a cohort or a teammate of the Lupin Rangers. So in other words, it leads them to believing that he's actually a good guy on the side of the Power Rangers, even though in reality he's working for both sides, and that's just a plain fact. But what does end up happening eventually from here is that we end up seeing another segment, which is one where Noel is confronted by Kagori, and he's about to give the Lupin collection item that he collected from the Lupin Rangers. But what happens is that instead he says he's going to have a conversation with Kagori. The conversation we don't actually get to see this episode, but it will happen in the next episode, and that will be very interesting to find out what that will actually lead to. Other than that, that's about it. I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy it? The preview shows that it's going to be a love episode about Sequoia and Umika, and it should be interesting. And also we'll be seeing the X-Emperor, which is the double form for Lupin X / Power Ranger X, Noel's main mecha. So that will be very cool to see next episode. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I thought it was okay. Not as good as last week's episode, but still interesting and still expands on the story. I'm just waiting for him to eventually really clear things up where they're not enemies anymore, because that's what's going to happen eventually. The two sides should just join forces, but it's just a matter of when it's going to actually happen. So until you guys, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So goodbye, guys.